Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little. We're here today with another fun hand for PokerNews.com. Today we are playing 50 big blinds deep, which is a little bit shallower than many of the hands we've done for PokerNews.com. I like to try to keep them somewhat deep stacked so that they apply to both cash games and tournaments. But, if you all want to see more short stacked play, let me know on Twitter at Jonathan Little, and I will certainly take it into consideration. So anyway, here I make it 800, which is pretty fine from the button with whatever somewhat wide range I want to play. Don't be too absurd, though. Don't be raising queen 2 offsuit or jack 4 offsuit from the button. That's going to get you in trouble. And we see a king 7-3 flop. I believe 2 videos ago for Poker News, we had a situation where it came king 7-2. And I think I specifically said, this is a spot where I'm betting small, even if I had a hand like jack 10 offsuit. Well, I didn't know this one was coming, but here it is. This is a spot where I am praying I bet small. This is a situation where this very dry flop should be great for my range and not so great for my opponents in the big blind. So I definitely like a bet of about 800 in this spot. And that is exactly what I do. And the opponent calls. In the previous hand, we had ace-king, remember? We are well protected by having all the good kings in our range. And also, even if we're betting something like ace-high here, it puts the opponent in a pretty tough spot because the opponent just doesn't have anything. And if I can make a bluff for 800 and pick up that pot pretty much ever, it's going to be a huge success. Like right here, for example. I had to put 800 into a 2200 pot. So the way you figure out how often a bluff needs to succeed is you take your bet, 800, and divide it by your bet plus the pot. So 800 plus 2200. 800 divided by 3000 is how much? 27% of the time or so. So if I pick up that pot 27% of the time, we're going to immediately profit with my bluffs, assuming they have no equity, 0%. And this may look like a 0% bluff, but it's not actually. Notice if our opponent has a 7, we get there sometimes. If he has an ace high, we get there sometimes. Like right now, if we peel an 8 and then peel a 9, we're going to win a big pot if our opponent has anything. And all that stuff counts into your equity. So it's definitely a spot where you can make a bluff if your opponents ever fold on the flop. And I think you're going to find that most people fold way too often on boards like that. They're going to fold something like 40% of the time, and I only need them to fold 27% of the time. That may not sound like much of an edge, but if you'd run that every single time you have the opportunity to make a continuation bet on a dry board, you are just going to be printing money. So anyway, here we are on the turn. Turn is an 8. The opponent checks again. All right, let's start thinking about our range here. We are probably betting almost everything on the flop. So when we get to the turn, we have almost everything. We definitely don't want to continue betting with everything. We don't want to bet with pocket queens at this point. We don't want to bet with a 7 at this point. We probably don't want to bet with an 8. So on the turn now, we're going to tighten up a decent amount and probably bet with mostly kings, sets, 2 pairs, and draws. So we have to be careful to not have too many draws in our range. Typically, the draws you want to put in your range first are the ones that have no showdown value. So which draws have no showdown value? Well, 6-5, 5-4, and 6-4 suiteds, which I would raise all those from the button, all have no showdown value and should all be bet, very clearly. Unless we think the opponent's a calling station, in which case they should not. Next, what do we have? We have 9-6. That's a hand, 9-6 suiteds. That's a hand that should often be bet. Next we have 10-9, Jack-9, and Jack-10. So as you see, here we are. We've worked our way up the straight draws and have found this hand. And I definitely think if we're betting all of those, that's going to be close to having too many bluffs in our range. It is worth mentioning that some of those have flush draws to go with them, so it's not like those are even ridiculous bluffs. I mean, clearly 6-4 of hearts is a pretty aggressive bluff and certainly could be given up on. So not necessarily sure I'm bluffing with it all the time, but it is at least reasonable. I'm also betting with my kings, though, in my sets and whatnot, so we are protected by having some premium hands in our range. If our opponent just checks shoves on us every time we bet the turn, he's going to be lighting money on fire because we're going to snap him off with our premium hands. And if he calls a lot, well, he's still paying our premium hands, and our draws are going to get there sometimes. And we're going to bluff with our draws sometimes. Also notice when it goes check on the turn, our opponent just can't mindlessly bluff and win the pot because we have a lot of 8s and under pairs that we can easily call with. So this is a strategy that's going to be really hard for our opponent to beat. I'm sure if he was diligently studying my strategy away from the table, he could probably find a small hole in it. Like, for example, maybe we're bluffing slightly too much. Or maybe we are checking behind and then calling slightly too much, so we should value bet slightly thinner or something like that. This is one of these scenarios where if you're playing against the best players in the world and they have poker tracking programs running where they can really pinpoint exactly what you're doing, yeah, they're probably going to beat you. But against 99.9% of poker players you're going to encounter, just thinking somewhat basically like this is going to be enough to put you well ahead of them. So anyway, you always want to make sure your checks are not obviously weak and your bets are not obviously strong or weak, either one. And that's definitely the case here. Remember, we're betting with some draws and we're betting with some nut hands. So the opponent can't do a whole lot about it. So we are going to bet. Notice I don't need to bet too big here. Pot is already 4,000. If I bet 2,000, what is my opponent going to do with ace highs? It's a crappy spot, right? What's he going to do with pocket fours? It's a crappy spot, right? He's probably going to call with a 7 or an 8 or a king pretty much every time. So yeah, I like this. The pot, if he calls, is going to go up to 8,000. The alternative would be to bet something like 3,500 on the turn. That's going to make the pot go to 10,000 or 11,000. Then I could shove the river. Using this bet size, though, I can make a small bet on the turn and then something like a 6,000 or 7,000 bet on the river and still have a few thousand chips left if it fails. And I definitely think it is worth it to give yourself 10 or 15 big blinds if your bluffs do fail. That is sort of a tournament skill that sometimes comes into play where you have to pick between giving yourself maximum fold equity by going all in or keeping a not good stack, but a 15 or 20 big blind stack if your play fails. And typically I try to leave myself some chips if my plays fail, just because you randomly come back from 20 big blinds. Also, you need to make sure you're being balanced against good players and you're doing it with your value hands too. That means you do leave some value on the table some portion of the time, but you do that in exchange for losing less when you are bluffing. So anyway, we bet 2,000 here. The opponent raises. That was not what I was expecting at all. And like I said, I don't need to tell you why this is going to be a tough spot for our opponent because we have sets and 2 pairs in our range. This time we don't, though. And we don't have a good draw, so we're not getting a good enough price to call. So you better fold, J Card Shark. He does fold. Good job. Good fold. Sometimes your plays are not going to work. When they don't, that is okay. But if you study the game away from the table, you can rest soundly at night knowing the bluff was at least reasonable. We discussed how to make at least reasonable bluffs over at pokercoaching.com. If you have not gone there and signed up for your free 7-day trial, please do it. Go there, study poker, work on your game, and get better. If you are here watching these videos on pokernews.com or on YouTube, know that I want you to be the best poker player you can be. And you're going to find that if you start winning money at poker and start winning a lot of money at poker, you're going to fall in love with poker and you're going to like it. And you're going to find that studying the game away from the table gives you that opportunity. So check it out at pokercoaching.com. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll talk to you next time.